Have you ever planted a seed and watched it grow? Not in a hurry, not overnight, but slowly, gently, in its own time. You place a tiny seed into the dark earth, cover it with soil, water it once, and then walk away. Nothing seems to happen. Days pass. Maybe a week goes by. And just when you start to wonder if that seed was a dud, a small green shoot breaks through the surface, reaching for sunlight. That shoot does not ask permission. It does not wonder whether it deserves to grow. It simply grows because something was planted, something was nurtured, and the conditions were right. Life works in much the same way, friends. Everything that appears in this world, every joy, every sorrow, every unexpected encounter, every quiet afternoon, everything has a cause. Nothing arises from nowhere. Nothing vanishes into nothing. And this is not some mystical belief reserved for those who spend their lives in robes or in mountain monasteries. This is simply the way things are, as natural and observable as the rain that falls from clouds that gathered moisture from the sea. The Buddha spoke of this with such simplicity that it almost sounds too plain. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. These words, found throughout the ancient texts, describe what we call dependent origination, the profound understanding that all things arise in dependence upon conditions. And within this great web of causes and conditions, there is one thread that runs closest to the human heart, one thread that each of us holds in our own hands. That thread is karma. Now, the word karma has traveled far from its original home. It has been borrowed, misquoted, printed on coffee mugs, turned into memes, and tossed around in casual conversation so often that its true meaning has become a bit blurred. Someone cuts you off in traffic and a friend jokes, karma will get them. Someone wins the lottery and people mutter, must be good karma. But the real meaning of karma is far more beautiful, far more nuanced, and far more empowering than any bumper sticker could capture. The word karma simply means action. That is it. Action. But not just any action. The Buddha was very specific about this. Karma, in the deepest sense, refers to intentional action. Intention is the key. The Buddha said, Satanaham bhikkhave kamam vadami, which means, it is intention that is called karma. This single statement changes everything. It means that the universe is not keeping some cold, mechanical tally of every movement your body makes. It means that what truly matters, what truly shapes the fabric of your life, is the quality of the intention behind your actions. Think about that for a moment. Two people might do the exact same thing on the outside, but if their intentions are different, the karmic seeds they plant are entirely different. A surgeon cuts into a patient's body with a knife, and a criminal stabs someone with a knife. The external action looks similar, but the intention behind each act is worlds apart. One is motivated by compassion and the desire to heal. The other is driven by anger or greed. The seeds they plant in the field of their own hearts are vastly different, and what grows from those seeds will be vastly different too. This brings us to one of the most beautiful and most misunderstood aspects of the Buddha's teaching on karma. It is not punishment. It is not revenge. It is not a cosmic judge sitting in the sky with a ledger, marking down your wrongs and waiting to settle the score. Karma is more like gravity. You do not get angry at gravity when you drop a glass and it shatters on the floor. You do not accuse gravity of being cruel or unfair. Gravity is simply a natural law. It operates regardless of who you are, where you were born, or what you believe. Karma operates in the same way. When you plant seeds of kindness, patience, and generosity, conditions are being set in motion for kindness, patience, and generosity to return to you. When you plant seeds of cruelty, deception, and selfishness, you are setting different conditions in motion. Not because someone is punishing you, but because that is simply the nature of seeds. Here is a story that might help bring this to life. Long ago, in the time of the Buddha, there was a monk named Kakupala. He was a devoted practitioner who decided to undertake an intensive meditation retreat during the rainy season. He made a strong determination not to lie down for the entire 3 months, dedicating himself fully to his practice. He meditated with such fierce resolve that his body weakened under the strain, and during the retreat, his eyesight began to fail. A physician offered him medicine, but the treatment required him to lie down and rest. Kakupala, committed to his vow, refused the treatment. By the end of the retreat, he had gone completely blind. But here is the remarkable part: despite his blindness, his mind had become extraordinarily clear and focused, and through his dedication, he attained the state of an arahant, one who has completely freed the heart from all suffering. Now, the story takes an interesting turn. One night, while Kakupala was doing walking meditation in the dark, he unknowingly stepped on many insects along his path. The next morning, other monks saw the dead insects and complained to the Buddha, accusing Kakupala of breaking the precept against taking life. The Buddha listened calmly and then asked a simple question: did any of you actually see Kakupala intentionally killing those insects? The monks admitted they had not. The Buddha then explained that Kakupala, being blind, had no awareness that insects were on his path, and more importantly, he had no intention to harm them. Without intention, there is no karma. The action happened, yes, but the karmic seed was not planted because the soil of intention was not present. But then the monks asked another question, one that goes even deeper: why did Kakupala go blind in the first place? He was such a sincere practitioner. Why would this happen to him? The Buddha then revealed a story from one of Kakupala's previous lives. In a former existence, Kakupala had been a physician. A woman had come to him with an eye disease, promising that if he cured her, she and her children would become his servants. The physician cured her completely. But the woman, frightened of her promise, pretended that her eyes were getting worse instead of better. The physician saw through her lie and, out of anger and revenge, concocted a different medicine, one that deliberately destroyed her eyesight. Because of that intentional act of cruelty, the karmic seed ripened across lifetimes, and Kakupala experienced blindness, even though he had become a good and earnest monk. This story is so rich because it shows several important things at once. It shows that karma is about intention, not just outward appearance. It shows that karmic seeds can take a very long time to ripen, sometimes spanning many lifetimes. And it shows that the ripening of past karma does not necessarily reflect who you are right now. Cacupula was a pure and devoted monk when his blindness manifested. His blindness was not a punishment for anything he was doing in that present life. It was the ripening of something ancient, something planted long ago. And even in the midst of that ripening, he was able to walk the path, deepen his practice, and free his mind completely. Past karma shaped his circumstances, but it did not dictate his response. He still had the power of choice, the power to transform his present moment. And that, friends, is one of the most liberating truths about the way karma works. Your past has shaped the ground you stand on, yes. But it does not chain you to that ground. The seeds that were planted yesterday, last year, or lifetimes ago may still be sprouting. Some of them may bring flowers, and some may bring thorns. But right here, right now, you still hold fresh seeds in your hand. The question is always, what will you plant next? So many people hear about karma and feel a wave of fear. They worry about all the mistakes they have made, all the unkind words they have spoken, all the times they acted out of selfishness or anger. And that worry is understandable. But the Buddha never taught karma as a reason to live in fear. He taught it as a reason to live with awareness. There is a world of difference between fear and awareness. Fear contracts the heart, makes you anxious, makes you feel paralyzed. Awareness opens the heart, makes you attentive, makes you gentle with yourself and with others. The teaching of karma is not meant to haunt you with your past. It is meant to awaken you to the extraordinary power of your present. Think of it this way. Imagine you are a gardener, and you have been tending a garden for many, many years. Some of what grows there you planted intentionally, lovingly. Some of what grows there you planted carelessly, not realizing what you were putting into the soil. And some of what grows there blew in on the wind from circumstances beyond your control. You cannot unplant what has already taken root. You cannot reach into last spring and remove the seeds you placed there. But you can choose very carefully what you plant from this moment forward. You can water the flowers and stop feeding the weeds. You can bring more sunlight to the parts of the garden that need healing. The Buddha encouraged this kind of present moment gardening again and again throughout his teachings. He never said, "You are doomed because of what you did." He always said, in essence, you have the capacity to change, to grow, to cultivate what is wholesome right now. This is why the path he taught is called a practice, not a punishment. It is something you do, moment by moment, choice by choice, with gentle awareness. There is another layer to karma that is worth sitting with for a while, and it has to do with how deeply interconnected we all are. Karma is not just about isolated individual actions bouncing back to a single person. Karma is also about relationships, about the invisible threads that connect one heart to another. When you are kind to someone, you plant a seed not only in your own heart but in theirs as well. That seed may blossom in ways you never see. The person you were kind to may carry that warmth forward and be kind to someone else, who in turn is kind to another, and on, like ripples spreading across a still pond. There was a young man named Madakandali, whose story is told in the ancient commentaries. Madakandali was the son of a very wealthy Brahmin named Adinapubhika, a name that literally meant, one who has never given anything away. This Brahmin was so miserly that he would not spend money even on his own family. When his son Madakandali fell gravely ill, the father refused to call a proper physician because it would cost money. Instead, he sought free remedies and half-hearted treatments, hoping to save a few coins. The boy's condition worsened day by day. Eventually, the father carried his dying son out onto the veranda, not out of compassion, but because he did not want visitors coming into the house and seeing his wealth. As Madakundali lay there, weak and fading, the Buddha happened to pass by during his morning alms round. The Buddha, with his profound awareness, perceived this young man and radiated a gentle, golden presence toward him. Madakundali, who had never had the chance to hear the teachings, never visited a monastery, never practiced any formal path, looked up and saw the Buddha. In that moment, even through his pain, a seed of faith and devotion arose in his heart. He felt a deep, sincere joy simply from beholding that compassionate figure. And with that single moment of wholesome intention, that single heartfelt turning of his mind towards something good and beautiful, Madakundali passed away and was reborn in a heavenly realm. Later, the Buddha helped the old Brahmin understand what had happened. The miserly father was shaken to his core. He realized that his greed had cost his son proper care in this life, but that even so, the power of a single moment of pure intention had opened a doorway of light for the boy. The father's heart cracked open, and he began to change. What makes this story so moving is the reminder that karma does not require grand gestures. It does not require years of formal training or elaborate rituals. A single moment of genuine goodness, a single heartbeat of sincere compassion or faith, is a seed. And that seed is real. It has power. It matters. So often, we underestimate the small things. We think that only big, dramatic actions count. We imagine that unless we make some monumental sacrifice or achieve some spectacular act of virtue, nothing we do really registers in the greater scheme of things. But the Buddha taught the opposite. He taught that every single moment of intention matters. Every time you choose patience over irritation, that is a seed. Every time you choose honesty over deception, that is a seed. Every time you offer a genuine smile to someone who is struggling, that is a seed. And every time you choose cruelty, even in some small, quiet way that nobody else sees, that too is a seed. The ancient texts describe karma as being more faithful than your own shadow. Your shadow follows you everywhere during the day, but it can be lost in darkness or in shade. Karma follows you even beyond that. It follows through the dark, through the light, through sleep, through waking, through this life and into whatever comes next. Not as a stalker, not as a threat, but simply as the natural continuation of what has been set in motion. And here is something that many people do not realize: karma does not always ripen immediately. In fact, most of the time, it does not. This is why the world can sometimes seem deeply unfair. You see someone who is dishonest and corrupt living in luxury, and you wonder, where is the justice? You see someone who is kind and generous struggling with hardship, and you feel a sense of outrage. If karma is real, people say, then why do bad things happen to good people? This is a question worth taking seriously, because it is one of the deepest questions any human being can ask. And the Buddha's answer is not a simple one, but it is honest. He taught that karma operates across a vast expanse of time, far beyond what we can see from our limited vantage point in one single lifetime. The seeds you plant today may not sprout tomorrow. They may not sprout this year. They may not even sprout in this lifetime. But they will sprout when the conditions are right, just as a seed buried deep in desert sand can lie dormant for decades and then burst into bloom after a single rainfall. The person living in luxury despite their dishonesty may be enjoying the fruits of good seeds planted long ago, in lives we cannot see. And the dishonest seeds they are planting now are germinating quietly, waiting for their season. The kind person struggling with hardship may be experiencing the ripening of difficult seeds from the distant past, while the good seeds they are planting now are slowly, steadily preparing to bear fruit. We see only a tiny sliver of the whole picture, like reading a single page torn from the middle of a very long novel and trying to judge the entire story from those few paragraphs. This does not mean we should be passive or resigned. Far from it. Understanding this vast timescale of karma is not meant to make us throw up our hands and say, well, it all works out eventually, so nothing matters. It matters enormously. Every seed matters. The whole point is that because karma is real, because actions do have consequences, what you do right now carries genuine meaning. Your choices are not random or pointless. They are creative acts that shape the world you inhabit and the world you will one day inhabit. There is a wonderful teaching in the Samyutta Nikaya where the Buddha speaks about 4 types of people in relation to karma. He describes a person who is in darkness and headed toward darkness, a person who is in darkness and headed toward light, a person who is in light and headed toward darkness, and a person who is in light and headed toward light. The person in darkness is someone currently experiencing difficult circumstances, perhaps poverty, illness, or misfortune, the ripening of past unwholesome karma. The person in light is someone currently enjoying pleasant circumstances, the ripening of past wholesome karma. But what determines where each person is headed is not their current circumstances. It is what they are doing right now. It is the quality of their present intentions and actions. So a person born into difficult circumstances who cultivates kindness, generosity, and wisdom is, in darkness but headed toward light. And a person born into privilege who acts with cruelty, greed, and heedlessness is, in light but headed toward darkness. This teaching is profoundly empowering because it declares that no matter where you find yourself right now, no matter how dark or how bright your current situation may be, the direction of your life remains in your hands. You are not a prisoner of your past. You are the gardener of your future. And this brings up something that many people carry quietly in their hearts, something that deserves gentle attention. It is the weight of guilt. So many people walk through life carrying a heavy burden of regret for things they have done, words they have spoken, choices they have made in moments of weakness or anger or confusion. They hear about karma and instead of feeling empowered, they feel crushed. They think, if every action has a consequence, then all those terrible things from my past must be lined up somewhere, waiting to come crashing down on me. And that thought alone can feel like a kind of prison. But here is something the Buddha made very clear, and it is something worth hearing with the whole heart: guilt and remorse are not the same thing. Remorse is a healthy, natural response when you recognize that you have caused harm. It is the heart saying, "That was not right, and it does not reflect who I want to be." Remorse is warm. It is honest. It opens the door to change. Guilt, on the other hand, is cold. Guilt locks the door and throws away the key. Guilt says, "You are bad, you will always be bad, and there is no way out. The Buddha never encouraged guilt. He encouraged remorse, followed by resolve, followed by action in a new direction. There is a powerful distinction in the teachings between what is called wholesome remorse and what is simply self-punishment. Wholesome remorse acknowledges the harm, generates a sincere wish not to repeat it, and then moves forward with renewed energy and care. Self-punishment just circles endlessly around the mistake, replaying it, magnifying it, using it as evidence that you are fundamentally flawed. The Buddha saw no benefit in that kind of inner torment. He taught that clinging to guilt is itself a form of suffering, and that the most courageous thing you can do after making a mistake is to learn from it and change course. This does not mean that past harmful actions simply disappear because you feel sorry. The karmic seeds have been planted, and they will ripen in their own time. But what changes, what truly and profoundly changes, is the quality of the soil. When you cultivate sincere remorse, when you resolve not to repeat the harmful action, when you actively plant new seeds of goodness, you are transforming the conditions of your inner garden so dramatically that even when old seeds ripen, they do so in a very different environment. It is like planting a bitter seed in soil that has been enriched with sweetness. The bitterness may still emerge, but it is tempered, softened, transformed by everything wholesome that surrounds it. Consider the story of Angulimala, one of the most extraordinary tales from the time of the Buddha. Angulimala was a man who had committed acts of terrible violence. Under the twisted influence of a corrupt teacher who told him he needed to collect 1,000 human fingers to achieve spiritual liberation, Angulimala became a feared bandit, terrorizing the countryside. He wore a garland of fingers around his neck. People fled in horror at the mention of his name. Even the king sent soldiers to hunt him down. By the time Angulimala had collected 999 fingers, he was so consumed by his dark path that he almost could not see beyond it. And then, the Buddha did something that no one else would dare to do. He walked directly into the forest where Angulimala lived. Alone. Without guards, without weapons, without any display of power. Just a man in simple robes, walking calmly along the road. Angulimala saw the Buddha from a distance and charged toward him with his sword raised. But no matter how fast he ran, he could not catch up to the Buddha, who was walking at a normal, steady pace. Exhausted and bewildered, Angulimala finally shouted, "Stop! Stop, monk!" The Buddha turned and said something that pierced through all the layers of violence and confusion and madness, "I have already stopped. It is you who have not stopped." Those words broke something open in Angulimala. The Buddha was not talking about physical movement. He was talking about the endless cycle of harm. "I have stopped causing harm to living beings," the Buddha explained. "You have not." In that moment, Angulimala saw himself clearly, perhaps for the first time. He threw down his weapon, fell at the Buddha's feet, and asked to be ordained as a monk. Now, what happened next is the part of the story that many people do not know, and it is the part that matters most when we talk about karma and change. Angulimala became a monk and practiced with genuine sincerity. He was truly transformed. But the karmic seeds of his past actions had already been planted, and they continued to ripen. When he went on alms rounds in the villages, people who recognized him would throw rocks at him. They beat him. They cursed him. He would return to the monastery bruised and bleeding, his bowl broken, his robes torn. And the Buddha would say to him, simply, "Bear it, Angulimala. You are experiencing in this life what might otherwise have caused you suffering for a much longer time." This is profound. The Buddha did not say, "Do not worry, the past is erased." He did not say, "Because you have changed, nothing bad will happen to you anymore." He acknowledged that the past still carries weight, that karmic seeds planted in violence will bear fruit. But he also made it clear that by changing course so completely, by planting entirely new seeds with such sincerity, Angulimala was dramatically altering the trajectory of his future. The suffering he experienced from the villagers' attacks was painful, yes, but it was a fraction of what his karmic debt might have produced in realms of far greater suffering. And here is what makes the story truly remarkable: despite everything, Angulimala attained enlightenment. He achieved the state of an arahant, fully liberated, his mind completely free. The man who once wore a garland of fingers became a being of profound peace and wisdom. His past did not define his destination. His present choices did. This story carries a message that is worth repeating quietly to yourself whenever you feel trapped by your own history. Change is always possible. Transformation is always available. The seeds of your past are real, and their fruits may still come, but the seeds you plant from this moment forward are equally real and equally powerful. You are never beyond redemption, never beyond the reach of your own capacity to turn toward goodness. Now, while we often think of karma in terms of big, dramatic actions, the Buddha was equally concerned with something far more subtle, something that operates every single day in ways we rarely examine. He spoke about 3 doorways through which karma is created: body, speech, and mind. Bodily karma is the easiest to understand. When you act physically, whether to help or to harm, a karmic seed is planted. But speech and mind are equally potent, and in many ways even more so, because they operate so constantly and so quietly that we often do not even notice them. Let us sit with speech for a moment. Words are not just sounds that vanish into the air. Words are actions. Every word you speak carries an intention, and that intention plants a seed. A kind word can lift someone out of despair. A cruel word can wound someone for years. And the tricky thing about speech is that we use it so casually, so automatically, that we rarely stop to consider the seeds we are scattering. There is an old story about a monk named Kokalika who lived during the time of the Buddha. Kokalika was a monk of some standing, but he harbored a deep jealousy toward the 2 chief disciples, Sariputta and Moggallana. These 2 were widely respected for their wisdom and spiritual attainment, and Kokalika could not bear it. His jealousy ate at him day and night, and he began to slander them. He went to the Buddha himself and accused Sariputta and Moggallana of having evil desires, of being corrupt and dishonest. The Buddha listened and then gently told Kokalika, "Do not say such things. Let your heart have confidence in Sariputta and Moggallana. They are of good conduct." But Kokalika would not listen. He repeated his accusations a second time. Again the Buddha cautioned him. He repeated them a third time. And again the Buddha warned him. But Kokalika's mind was so consumed by jealousy that he could not hear the Buddha's words. He left, still burning with resentment. According to the ancient texts, not long after that encounter, Kokalika's body broke out in painful boils that grew and grew until they consumed him, and he died in agony. The Buddha later explained that Kokalika had been reborn in a realm of tremendous suffering, not because of some vengeful punishment, but because the karmic seeds of slandering two beings of great virtue were so potent, so heavy with dark intention, that they ripened swiftly and painfully. This story is not told to frighten anyone. It is told to illuminate how seriously the Buddha regarded the karma of speech. Slander, gossip, harsh words, dishonest speech, these are not minor things. They are seeds with real consequences. The Buddha identified 4 types of unwholesome speech: lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle chatter. Each of these plants its own variety of karmic seed, and each bears its own kind of fruit. But just as unwholesome speech creates suffering, wholesome speech creates immense goodness. Kind words, truthful words, words of encouragement, words that bring harmony instead of division, these are seeds that bear sweet fruit. And the beautiful thing is that you have the opportunity to practice wholesome speech in every single conversation, every single day. You do not need to be on a mountaintop or in a monastery. You can practice right here, in the middle of your ordinary life, in the way you speak to your family, your friends, your colleagues, even the stranger you pass on the street. And then there is the third doorway, the subtlest and most powerful of all, the mind. The Buddha taught that the mind is the forerunner of all states, that all that we are arises with our thoughts, and that with our thoughts we make the world. This is one of the opening verses of the Dhammapada, and it is a statement of extraordinary depth. It means that before any word is spoken, before any bodily action is taken, there is a thought, an intention, a movement of the mind. And that mental movement is itself a karmic act. You can plant karmic seeds without saying a word and without lifting a finger. A thought of ill will toward someone is a seed. A thought of compassion toward someone is a seed. A moment of greed is a seed. A moment of generosity is a seed. The mind is the most fertile garden of all, and it is the one most of us leave almost entirely untended. We spend so much time and energy managing our external actions and our speech, but we let our minds run wild, unchecked, unsupervised, like a garden that no one visits. The Buddha was not suggesting that we become obsessive about monitoring every fleeting thought. Thoughts arise naturally, and many of them simply pass through like clouds in the sky. The key is not to suppress every unwholesome thought but to notice which thoughts you feed, which thoughts you dwell on, which thoughts you choose to nurture and act upon. A thought of anger may arise uninvited, and that in itself is not karma. But when you pick up that thought, examine it, feed it with more fuel, replay the situation that caused it, add more grievances to it, and nurture it into a full burning fire, that is when the karmic seed takes root. There is a lovely image from the teachings that compares the mind to a piece of land. When rain falls on a mountainside, the water flows downhill and gathers in the valleys, following the channels that have already been carved by previous rainfall. In the same way, the mind tends to flow along habitual patterns. If you have spent years cultivating anger, the channels of anger are deep and well worn, and the mind flows easily into anger. If you have spent years cultivating patience, those channels are deep instead, and the mind flows naturally toward patience. Each time you think a thought, you are either deepening an old channel or beginning to carve a new one. Over time, The landscape of the mind is shaped by these channels, and the direction your thoughts naturally flow determines much of the quality of your life. This is why the Buddha placed such emphasis on meditation, not as an escape from life, but as a way of tending the garden of the mind. In meditation, you sit quietly and observe the mind without judgment, without clinging, without pushing anything away. You begin to see, with remarkable clarity, the seeds that are being planted moment by moment. You begin to notice the habitual channels, the patterns, the tendencies. And with that awareness, you gain something priceless, the freedom to choose a different direction. But this is not only about formal meditation. This kind of awareness can be cultivated in the midst of daily life. When you are standing in line and someone cuts ahead of you, that moment of irritation is an opportunity to notice what kind of seed is being offered. Do you pick it up and nurture it into full-blown anger? Or do you let it pass, like a cloud crossing the sky, and choose a different response? When someone says something unkind, do you immediately fire back with cruelty, deepening the channel of harshness? Or do you pause, take a breath, and respond from a place of steadiness? These moments are small, seemingly insignificant. But they are the moments in which karma is most actively created, because they happen so frequently and so automatically. The big moments of life, the dramatic turning points, are rare. The small moments are constant. And it is the accumulation of these small, quiet, everyday karmic seeds that truly shapes the course of a life. Drop by drop, the bucket fills. The Buddha used this exact image to describe how karma accumulates. Do not think lightly of evil, saying, "It will not come to me." Drop by drop, the water pot is filled. Likewise, the fool, gathering it little by little, fills himself with evil. And equally, do not think lightly of good, saying, "It will not come to me." Drop by drop, the water pot is filled. Likewise, the wise one, gathering it little by little, fills himself with good. This teaching is simultaneously humbling and encouraging. It is humbling because it means that the small unkindnesses you barely notice, the little lies, the tiny acts of selfishness, the moments of impatience, they all add up. They are drops in the pot. But it is encouraging because it means that the small kindnesses, the quiet acts of generosity, the gentle patience, the moments of genuine compassion, they also add up. Every single one counts. There is a story about a woman named Punna, a servant in a wealthy household. Punna had very little in terms of material wealth. She worked hard every day, and what she earned was barely enough to survive. But Punna had a generous heart. One evening, after a long day of work, she prepared a small meal for herself, the only food she would eat that day. On her way home, she encountered a monk on his alms round. Without hesitation, she offered her meal to the monk, even though it meant she would go hungry that night. The monk she offered the food to happened to be Sariputta, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, a being of profound spiritual attainment. The karmic seed of generosity that Punna planted through that single offering was extraordinary, not because of the quantity of what she gave, but because of the quality of her intention. She gave everything she had, without reservation, without expectation of return, out of pure generosity. The Buddha later spoke about Punna's offering and explained that the merit of such an act, performed with complete sincerity and selflessness, was immeasurable. Punna's story is a beautiful reminder that karma is not measured by the size of the action but by the depth of the intention. A wealthy person who gives 1,000 coins out of vanity or a desire for praise plants a very different seed than a poor person who gives their only meal out of genuine love. The external action may look different in scale, but the internal reality, the quality of the intention, is what determines the nature of the karmic seed. This understanding invites a radical shift in how we think about wealth, success, generosity, and value. In the eyes of karma, it is not how much you give but how you give. It is not how much you do but why you do it. The most powerful karmic seeds are often the quietest ones, planted in moments that no one else witnesses, arising from intentions that no one else sees. A silent prayer for someone's well-being, a decision not to speak harshly even when provoked, a moment of genuine forgiveness extended in the privacy of your own heart, these are among the most potent seeds a human being can plant. And this brings us to something that often goes unspoken when we discuss karma, something that lives in the subtle spaces between action and intention, between what the world sees and what the heart knows. It is the question of what happens when karma seems to operate in ways that our human sense of fairness simply cannot accept. When you look around the world and see a child born into suffering through no apparent fault of their own, when you see someone who has lived with integrity struck down by illness while someone who has cheated and lied lives in comfort, when you see entire communities devastated by circumstances that no single person seems to have caused, the neat and tidy version of karma that says, "Good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people," falls apart completely. And if we are honest, it should fall apart, because that neat and tidy version was never what the Buddha taught. The Buddha's teaching on karma is far more sophisticated, far more compassionate, and far more honest than a simple reward and punishment system. He acknowledged openly that the workings of karma are among the most complex and subtle realities in existence. In fact, he specifically warned against trying to trace every single event back to a specific karmic cause, saying that such an attempt would drive a person to frustration and even madness. The full scope of how karma operates is said to be one of the four unthinkables, matters so vast and intricate that the ordinary human mind cannot fully comprehend them. This is not a dodge or an evasion. It is an honest acknowledgement that reality is far more complex than any simple formula can capture. Think about it this way: if you throw a pebble into a pond, you can watch the ripples spread outward in a beautiful, predictable pattern. But if you throw 1,000 pebbles into a pond at the same time, the ripples intersect, overlap, cancel each other out in some places, and amplify each other in others. The surface of the water becomes an impossibly intricate dance of waves that no human eye could trace back to any single pebble. Now imagine that the pond is not just your lifetime but countless lifetimes, and the pebbles are not just your actions but the actions of countless beings whose lives have intersected with yours. That is the complexity of karma. This is why the Buddha discouraged the fatalistic view that everything that happens to you is the result of your past karma. He explicitly rejected this idea. In the Savaka Sutta, a wanderer named Molya Savaka came to the Buddha and asked whether it was true, as some teachers claimed, that everything a person experiences is entirely the result of past actions. The Buddha said no. He explained that there are multiple causes for what we experience in life. Some experiences arise from physical causes like bile, phlegm, or changes in the body. Some arise from changes in the weather or the environment. Some arise from carelessness or accident. Some arise from the actions of others. And some arise from past karma. To claim that everything is caused by past karma alone is to go beyond what is true, he said. This teaching is enormously important because it frees us from a cruel misunderstanding. Without this teaching, karma becomes a weapon used to blame victims for their suffering. You must have done something terrible in a past life to deserve this, people say, and that kind of thinking is not only unkind but also inaccurate according to the Buddha's own words. The world is shaped by many forces, not just individual karma. There are natural forces, social forces, biological forces, and the actions of other beings, all interweaving to create the tapestry of each moment. Karma is one thread in that tapestry, an important one, perhaps the most important one over the long arc of existence, but not the only one. This understanding should make us more compassionate, not less. When you see someone suffering, the response the Buddha would encourage is not to wonder what they did to deserve it but to ask how you can help. Compassion does not require a karmic explanation. It does not need to analyze the causes before it acts. Compassion simply responds to suffering with a wish to alleviate it. And that response of compassion is itself a karmic act, a beautiful seed planted in the garden of your heart. There is a story that illustrates this beautifully. During the time of the Buddha, there was a monk named Tissa who became afflicted with a terrible skin disease. His condition was so severe that his robes stuck to his body, his skin cracked and oozed, and the other monks could not bear to be near him. One by one, they all moved away. Tissa was left alone, unable to care for himself, lying in filth and pain, abandoned by the very community that was supposed to support him. When the Buddha learned of this, he did not give a lecture about Tissa's past karma. He did not gather the monks and say, "This is what happens when you plant unwholesome seeds." Instead, he went to Tissa himself. He heated water. He personally washed Tissa's body with his own hands, gently cleaning the wounds, removing the soiled robes, and dressing him in fresh cloth. He cared for this sick monk with the same tenderness a mother would show her only child. And while doing this, while Tissa's body was clean and his heart was soft with gratitude and trust, the Buddha offered him a teaching. In that moment of openness and relief, Tissa's mind found peace, and he passed away shortly after, having attained a deep realization. The Buddha then turned to the assembled monks and said, "Whoever would tend to me, let them tend to the sick." He did not say, "Whoever wants to earn good karma, tend to the sick." He simply said that caring for those who are suffering is the same as caring for him. This story reveals something essential about how the Buddha wanted us to relate to karma and to each other. The point is never to stand at a distance and analyze why someone is suffering. The point is to step forward and help. And yet, while we cannot always know the specific karmic causes behind someone's situation, we can observe certain patterns in our own lives that shed light on how karma works in a more immediate and practical way. Have you ever noticed how a single moment of anger can set off a chain of events that lasts for hours, sometimes days? You wake up feeling irritable. You snap at someone over breakfast. They feel hurt and withdraw. You feel guilty but also defensive. The tension builds throughout the day. You are short with a colleague. They become uncooperative. A project suffers. You come home stressed. You snap again. And on it goes, ripple after ripple after ripple, all traceable back to that first seed of irritation that was picked up and nurtured instead of noticed and released. Now imagine the opposite. You wake up and feel a moment of irritation, but instead of grabbing hold of it, you simply notice it. You take a breath. You choose a different response. You speak gently over breakfast. The other person smiles. You carry that warmth into your day. You are patient with your colleague. They are cooperative. The project flows smoothly. You come home feeling steady and at ease. The ripples of that single choice spread outward and touch every interaction you have. This is karma operating in real time, visible, observable, undeniable. You do not need to believe in past lives or future realms to see this at work. You can watch it unfold in a single morning. The seeds of your intentions bear fruit, sometimes within minutes. And this immediate, observable karma is what makes the Buddha's teaching so practical and so relevant to everyday life. It is not just a philosophical theory about some distant future. It is a living reality that plays out in every relationship, every conversation, every decision you make. This brings up something interesting about the relationship between karma and habit. The Buddha spoke often about what he called sankhara, a word that can be translated as mental formations or volitional activities. These are the deeply ingrained patterns of thinking, feeling, and reacting that we carry with us. Some of these patterns are wholesome, like the tendency to be generous or patient. Some are unwholesome, like the tendency to be jealous or resentful. And these patterns do not just appear out of nowhere. They are built, layer by layer, choice by choice, through the repeated planting of similar karmic seeds. Every time you choose anger, the habit of anger gets a little bit stronger. Every time you choose patience, the habit of patience gets a little bit stronger. Over time, these habits become so ingrained that they feel like who you are. That is just how I am, people say. I have always had a temper. Or, I have always been a worrier. But the Buddha would gently challenge that assumption. Those habits are not who you are. They are simply channels that have been carved deeply through repetition. And just as they were created through repetition, they can be changed through repetition, through the deliberate, patient, consistent planting of different seeds. There is a story about the monk Vangisa that touches on this beautifully. Vangisa was gifted with extraordinary poetic talent. He could compose verses on the spot with elegance and power. But he also carried a deep struggle with lust and desire. Even after ordaining as a monk, he found himself drawn to attractive people, his mind spinning into fantasies and cravings. This caused him great distress because he recognized that these mental habits were creating suffering, pulling him away from the peace he sought. What is remarkable about Vangisa's story is his honesty. He did not pretend the struggle was not there. He did not hide behind his poetic talent or his monastic robes. He openly acknowledged his difficulty, and he worked with it patiently and persistently. He used his awareness to notice when the old channels of desire were activating. He used reflection to remind himself of the suffering that following those channels would bring. And he used his poetic gift in service of the teachings, composing beautiful verses that turned his attention toward wisdom and liberation rather than craving. Over time, through sustained effort and genuine practice, Vangisa freed himself from those old patterns. He became an arahant, celebrated not only for his poetry but for his profound inner transformation. Vajrayesa's story is encouraging because it does not pretend that change is easy or instant. It honors the reality that deeply ingrained habits take time and effort to transform. But it also demonstrates that transformation is genuinely possible, that no habit is so fixed, no pattern so solid, that it cannot be changed through patient, consistent, wholesome effort. And this brings us to something that people rarely discuss when they talk about karma, the karma of inaction. We tend to think of karma as being created only when we do something, when we act, speak, or deliberately think. But the Buddha also recognized that choosing not to act when action is called for creates its own kind of karmic consequence. If you see someone being harmed and you have the ability to help but choose to look away, that choice is itself a karmic act. The intention behind the inaction, whether it is fear, indifference, selfishness, or cowardice, is the seed that gets planted. This is not meant to make you feel guilty about every situation you have ever walked past. There are countless moments in life where the right thing to do is genuinely unclear, where the situation is too dangerous or too complex for simple intervention. The Buddha was not teaching perfectionism. He was simply pointing out that our choices include the choice not to act, and that this too carries weight. Awareness of this can gently expand our sense of responsibility without crushing us under its burden. There is a concept in the teachings that describes what are called the 10 courses of wholesome action and the 10 courses of unwholesome action. These are not commandments handed down by a deity. They are simply observations about which kinds of actions tend to produce suffering and which kinds tend to produce happiness. The 10 unwholesome actions include killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, idle chatter, covetousness, ill will, and wrong view. The 10 wholesome actions are the opposites: protecting life, being generous, maintaining integrity in relationships, speaking truthfully, speaking harmoniously, speaking gently, speaking meaningfully, being content, wishing others well, and holding right view. What is interesting about these lists is that they cover all 3 doorways of karma: body, speech, and mind. 3 relate to bodily action, 4 relate to speech, and 3 relate to the mind. And notice how heavily speech is represented. 4 out of 10. This reflects how seriously the Buddha took the karmic power of words, something we explored earlier through the story of Kokalika. Words are not trivial. They are among the most potent karmic tools we possess, and we use them constantly, often without any awareness of what we are planting. But the Buddha did not offer these lists as rules to be followed out of fear. He offered them as guidelines for anyone who genuinely wants to cultivate happiness and reduce suffering. If you want to know where you are headed, the teachings suggest, look at what you are doing. Not what you believe, not what you profess, not what you post for the world to see, but what you actually do in the quiet, unobserved moments of your life. Those moments are the truest measure of the karmic seeds you are planting. There is a teaching about a Brahmin named Janasoni who came to the Buddha with a question about the afterlife. He wanted to know whether offerings made to departed relatives actually reached them. The Buddha's answer was characteristically nuanced. He explained that if the departed relative had been reborn in certain realms, the offerings might benefit them. But if they had been reborn in other realms, the offerings would not reach them directly. However, the Buddha added something profound: regardless of whether the offering reached the departed relative, the act of generosity itself would always benefit the giver. The wholesome intention behind the offering was a karmic seed that would bear fruit for the person who made it, no matter what. This teaching reveals something fundamental about how karma works. The benefit of a good action is never wasted, even if its intended external target does not receive it. The seed is planted in the heart of the one who acts, and that seed will bear fruit in its own time. Generosity makes the giver generous. Kindness makes the giver kind. Compassion makes the giver compassionate. These are not just poetic sentiments. They are descriptions of how karmic seeds actually work. Every wholesome action shapes and transforms the one who performs it, regardless of whether the external world responds in the way we hope. This understanding can bring a deep sense of peace to those who feel that their kindness has gone unrecognized or their generosity has been taken advantage of. From a karmic perspective, no act of genuine goodness is ever lost. It is always working, always ripening, always shaping the inner landscape toward greater beauty and peace. The world may not notice, may not reciprocate, may not even say thank you. But the seed knows nothing of the world's opinion. It simply grows. And there is something else hidden in the folds of this teaching, something that touches on one of the most tender and vulnerable places in the human heart. It is the question of whether we deserve good things, whether we are worthy of happiness, whether the universe somehow owes us anything at all. So many people carry a secret belief that they are not good enough, that they have done too many wrong things, that they are fundamentally undeserving of peace and joy. This belief sits like a stone in the chest, heavy and cold, and it colors every experience with a faint shade of unworthiness. The Buddha's teaching on karma does not support this belief at all. Karma does not say you are unworthy. Karma says you are the author of your own story, that every moment is a blank page, that every breath is a new opportunity to plant something beautiful. The weight of the past is real, yes, but it is not a verdict. It is simply the momentum of what came before. And momentum can be redirected. A river can be gently guided into new channels. A garden can be replanted. A heart can be tended with new care. There was a woman named Ambapali who lived during the time of the Buddha. She was a courtesan, a woman whose livelihood was built around pleasure and sensuality. In the social hierarchy of her time, her profession placed her outside the circle of respectability. And yet, when she heard the Buddha teach, something stirred deep within her. She invited the Buddha and his entire community of monks for a meal, and she served them with such sincerity, such genuine devotion, that the Buddha accepted her invitation over that of a group of wealthy and powerful Licchavi princes who had also extended an invitation. Ambapali later donated her mango grove to the community of monks, and she eventually ordained as a nun. Her verses, preserved in the Therigatha, are among the most moving poems in all of Buddhist literature. She wrote about watching her own body age, her beauty fading, her hair turning white, her skin wrinkling, and instead of despair, she found freedom. She saw the impermanence of the body and released her attachment to it. She found peace not by denying her past but by planting new seeds so powerful, so wholesome, that they transformed the trajectory of her entire existence. Ambapali's story is a quiet reminder that who you were yesterday does not have to be who you are today. The seeds of your past are real, and they may still produce their fruits, but the seeds you plant right now are equally real and carry their own power. No one is locked into a single identity. No one is defined solely by what they have done. The heart is always capable of new growth, new direction, new life. And speaking of new growth, there is a subtle but important teaching about how different kinds of karmic seeds interact with each other. The Buddha used the metaphor of salt and water to explain this. Imagine you take a large spoonful of salt and drop it into a small cup of water. The water becomes undrinkable, overwhelmingly salty. Now imagine you take that same spoonful of salt and drop it into a vast, clean river. The salt dissolves, and the river flows on, essentially unchanged. The amount of salt is the same in both cases, but the effect is completely different because of the volume of water. In the same way, the Buddha taught, a single unwholesome karmic seed planted in a mind that is small, untrained, and filled with negativity will produce powerful, overwhelming results. But that same unwholesome seed planted in a mind that is vast, well cultivated, and rich with wholesome qualities will still ripen, but its effect will be greatly diminished. The wholesome qualities act like the vast river, diluting and softening the impact of the unwholesome seed. This teaching has a deeply practical implication. It means that cultivating goodness is not just about earning future rewards. It is about building resilience. It is about creating such a vast reservoir of wholesome qualities in the mind that when the inevitable difficulties of life arise, when old unwholesome seeds ripen, you have the inner resources to meet them with grace, with steadiness, with a heart that bends but does not break. And so the question is never really about whether you have made mistakes. Of course you have. Every human being who has ever lived has planted unwholesome seeds at some point. The question is what kind of river you are building. How vast, how clean, how deep is the water of your wholesome intentions? Because that river will carry you through whatever storms may come, softening the salt, diluting the bitterness, carrying you forward with a current of goodness that no single mistake can overcome. This image of the river leads naturally into something that the Buddha spoke about with great tenderness, something that connects karma not just to individual lives but to the relationships between people, the invisible bonds that draw certain souls together across time, across distance, across the vast ocean of existence itself. Have you ever met someone and felt an immediate, inexplicable connection? A sense of recognition that goes deeper than anything you can logically explain? Or have you ever encountered someone for the first time and felt an instant, irrational discomfort, a tension that has no apparent cause? The Buddha taught that these experiences are not random. They are echoes of karmic connections forged in times and places we can no longer consciously remember. The ancient texts are filled with stories of beings whose lives intertwined again and again across multiple existences, drawn together by the gravity of shared karma. Sometimes these connections are rooted in love and mutual support. Sometimes they are rooted in conflict and unresolved harm. But in every case, they illustrate a profound truth. Karma is not just something that happens to individuals in isolation. It is deeply, fundamentally relational. The seeds you plant in your interactions with others create bonds, and those bonds persist. There is a collection of stories called the Jataka tales, which recount the previous lives of the being who would eventually become the Buddha. In these stories, certain characters appear again and again in different roles and forms. A person who was a loyal friend in one life appears as a devoted animal companion in another. A person who was an adversary in one life shows up as a rival or obstacle in another. The same souls keep meeting, keep dancing with each other, drawn together by the momentum of what they have shared. One of these stories tells of a time when the future Buddha was born as a deer, a golden deer of extraordinary beauty living deep in the forest. A king, out hunting, spotted the golden deer and became obsessed with capturing it. He ordered his men to surround the forest and drive all the animals toward him. Hundreds of deer were trapped and terrified. The golden deer, seeing the suffering of the other animals, stepped forward and offered himself to the king, asking only that the other deer be spared. The king was so moved by this act of selfless courage that he not only released all the deer but also declared the entire forest a sanctuary where no living being would ever be hunted again. The commentary explains that the king in this story was an earlier incarnation of a person who would later become one of the Buddha's most devoted followers. The karmic bond between them, rooted in this moment of compassion and mutual recognition, continued to draw them together across lifetimes until they met again in the time of the historical Buddha. The seed of kindness planted in that forest echoed forward through time, bringing them back into each other's lives under new circumstances, in new forms, but with the same underlying connection. This way of understanding relationships changes how you look at the people around you. The family you were born into, the friends you have made, the strangers who have crossed your path at pivotal moments, none of these connections are accidental. They are all woven from the threads of shared karma. This does not mean that every relationship is pleasant or that every connection is a blessing in disguise. Some karmic bonds are forged in pain, and they bring pain when they ripen. But even these difficult connections carry within them the possibility of resolution, of healing, of finally planting a different kind of seed together. Think about a relationship in your life that has been difficult. Maybe it is a family member you have always struggled with, someone whose words seem to find your most vulnerable places with uncanny precision. From the perspective of karma, this relationship is not a punishment. It is a meeting point, a place where old seeds are ripening and new seeds can be planted. Every interaction within that relationship is an opportunity. You can choose to deepen the old channels of conflict, or you can begin, gently and patiently, to carve new ones. This does not mean you have to stay in harmful situations. The Buddha never taught passive acceptance of abuse or cruelty. Wisdom knows when to stay and when to walk away. But even walking away can be done with a wholesome intention, with a heart that says, "I wish you well, but this pattern of harm needs to stop." That intention itself is a karmic seed, one that begins to heal the bond even as it creates healthy distance. There is a story about a Brahmin named Tadaya, a man of considerable wealth who was so attached to his possessions and his home that even death could not fully separate him from them. Tadaya was miserly and proud. He looked down on others, clung fiercely to his status, and spent his life guarding his riches with an intensity that consumed his every thought. When he died, his attachment to his home and his wealth was so powerful that he was reborn not in a human form, not in a heavenly realm, but as a dog, right there in his own house. His son, a young Brahmin named Subha, inherited everything and continued living in the family home, unaware that the dog wandering around the property was his father in a new form. When the Buddha visited the area and was offered a meal by Subha, the Buddha gently revealed what had happened. He told Subha that his father, driven by the force of attachment and pride, had been reborn as the household dog. To prove it, the Buddha spoke to the dog, calling him by his former name, and asked where he had hidden a stash of gold that no one else knew about. The dog, responding to the name and the memory, went and dug at the exact spot where the treasure was buried. Subha was stunned. This story carries a teaching that goes far beyond a simple moral about greed. It speaks to the way karma shapes not just our circumstances but our very form, our very nature. Tadaya's relentless attachment to material things did not just create future discomfort. It literally shaped what he became. The energy of his obsession, the quality of his mental habits, the seeds he planted day after day through his grasping and his pride, all of this coalesced into a rebirth that perfectly reflected the inner landscape he had cultivated throughout his life. Now, this is not told to make anyone fear attachment. It is told to invite reflection. What are the mental qualities you are nurturing most consistently? What are the habits of mind that run so deep they feel like second nature? Because those habits, those qualities, are the architects of what comes next. Not in some abstract, theoretical way, but in the most concrete and intimate way possible. You are, in a very real sense, becoming what you practice. If you practice generosity day after day, you are becoming a generous being. Not just someone who gives things away, but someone whose fundamental nature is oriented toward openness and sharing. If you practice resentment day after day, you are becoming a resentful being. Not just someone who has occasional grievances, but someone whose fundamental nature is oriented toward bitterness and contraction. This is karma at its most personal and most powerful, the slow, steady shaping of character through repeated choice. And this connects to something the Buddha taught about the 5 destinations of rebirth, the 5 realms where beings can be reborn depending on the dominant quality of their karmic seeds. These realms are not just places out there somewhere. They are also descriptions of psychological states, of the inner worlds we create through our habits. A being dominated by cruelty and hatred creates an inner world of burning, of torment, of relentless suffering. A being dominated by ignorance and dullness creates an inner world of confusion, of stumbling through darkness without understanding. A being dominated by craving and instinct creates an inner world of desperate hunger, of never having enough, of grasping at everything and being satisfied by nothing. A being dominated by basic decency and moral conduct creates an inner world of stability, of relative ease, of the kind of everyday happiness that comes from living with integrity. And a being dominated by generosity, concentration, and refined joy creates an inner world of luminosity, of expansive well-being, of deep contentment. You can see these realms operating right now, in this very life, in the people you encounter every day. You know people who live in a kind of private hell, consumed by anger or hatred that burns them from the inside. You know people who wander through life in a fog of confusion, never quite understanding why things happen the way they do. You know people who are driven by an insatiable hunger for more, whether it is more money, more recognition, more pleasure, never feeling fulfilled no matter how much they accumulate. You know people who live with a steady, quiet goodness that brings them genuine peace. And occasionally, you meet someone whose presence radiates a kind of joy and lightness that seems to come from somewhere very deep. These are not just personality types. They are the living expressions of karmic cultivation. They are what people have become through the accumulated weight of their choices, their habits, their planted seeds. And the empowering truth in all of this is that the cultivation can be changed. The direction can shift. The seeds being planted right now will determine which inner world grows strongest in the future. This is where karma and compassion intersect in a way that is profoundly important. When you truly understand karma, you stop judging people for where they are and start seeing them with empathy for how they got there. The person consumed by anger did not choose to be angry in some isolated moment of perversity. They arrived at that state through a long series of choices, habits, experiences, and conditions, some within their control and some not. The person lost in confusion did not wake up one day and decide to be confused. They are the product of countless causes and conditions, many of them stretching back long before they can remember. This understanding does not excuse harmful behavior. It does not say, well, they cannot help it, so we should just accept it. But it does soften the hardness of judgment. It replaces the cold eye of condemnation with the warm eye of understanding. And that warmth is itself a karmic seed, one that plants compassion in the heart of the one who sees with such clarity. The Buddha modeled this kind of seeing throughout his life. He never looked at a person and saw only what they were in that moment. He saw the long arc of their karmic journey, the accumulated weight of lifetimes of choices. He saw the potential hidden beneath even the thickest layers of unwholesome habit. He saw the seed of awakening that exists in every single being, no matter how deeply buried it might be. And because he saw that potential, he never gave up on anyone. There is a story about a woman named Rohini who lived during the time of the Buddha. Rohini was born into a respectable family, but she was afflicted with a severe skin disease that caused painful sores and rashes all over her body. She was deeply ashamed of her condition and hid herself away, unwilling to be seen by others. When the Buddha came to her town, her family encouraged her to go and listen to his teachings, but she refused, too embarrassed by her appearance. The Buddha, knowing her situation, spoke in a way that his words carried directly to where she was hiding. He talked about the nature of beauty and ugliness, about how the outer form is simply a temporary expression of deeper conditions, about how the body is not who you truly are. His words pierced through Rohini's shame and touched something deep within her. She came out of hiding and approached the Buddha, who received her with complete acceptance and warmth. The Buddha then explained the karmic roots of her condition. In a previous life, Rohini had been the chief queen of a king. She had become insanely jealous of one of the other queens, a woman renowned for her beauty. In a fit of rage and envy, Rohini had ordered that itching powder be scattered in the beautiful queen's bed and clothing, causing her terrible discomfort and skin irritation. That deliberate act of cruelty, rooted in jealousy and malice, had planted a seed that ripened across lifetimes as the very skin disease Rohini now suffered from. But the story does not end there. The Buddha did not reveal this simply to explain the cause of her suffering. He revealed it so that Rohini could understand the mechanism and plant new seeds. He encouraged her to practice generosity, to cultivate loving kindness, to replace the old patterns of jealousy and ill will with new patterns of goodness and care. Rohini did exactly that. She gave generously, she practiced with sincerity, and over time, her condition improved. More importantly, her heart was transformed. She was no longer defined by her disease or by the jealousy that had caused it. She had planted new seeds, and they were beginning to grow. Rohini's story carries a message about the relationship between inner states and outer circumstances that is worth reflecting on deeply. The Buddha was not saying that every illness is caused by a specific past life action. Remember the Savaka Sutta, there are many causes for what we experience. But he was illustrating a broader principle, that the quality of what happens on the inside tends to express itself on the outside over time. A heart filled with jealousy and cruelty creates conditions for suffering, both for the one who harbors those feelings and for those around them. A heart filled with love and generosity creates conditions for well-being. This is not magic. It is simply the nature of seeds. And this brings us to something that many people find surprising when they first encounter it in the Buddhist teachings, the concept of merit, and in particular, the practice of sharing merit with others. In the Buddhist tradition, when someone performs a good action, whether it is an act of generosity, a period of meditation, or an expression of moral integrity, the wholesome karmic energy generated by that action is called merit. And the Buddha taught that this merit can be shared. You might wonder how that works. If karma is about individual intention and individual action, how can the merit of one person's good deeds benefit someone else? The answer lies in the nature of intention itself. When you dedicate the merit of your good actions to another being, when you sincerely wish, "May the goodness of what I have done be shared with all beings," or "May the merit of this action benefit my departed mother," the very act of that generous dedication is itself a wholesome intention. It is an act of selflessness, of expansive goodwill, of love that reaches beyond the boundaries of the self. And that act creates its own powerful karmic seed. There is a beautiful story about this in the Pedavathu, a collection of stories about beings who have passed on and are experiencing the results of their actions. A man named Nanda was suffering in a realm of great deprivation. His relatives in the human world performed acts of generosity and dedicated the merit to him. The moment the merit was shared and Nanda rejoiced in the good deeds of his relatives, his condition was transformed. He was released from his suffering and found himself in a state of comfort and ease. The key here is the rejoicing. The Buddha explained that when someone shares merit with you, the benefit is activated by your own act of rejoicing in their goodness. It is not a mechanical transfer, like pouring water from one cup to another. It is more like lighting one candle from another. The first candle loses nothing, and the second candle gains its own light. The act of rejoicing in another's goodness is itself a wholesome mental action, a karmic seed planted in the mind of the one who rejoices. So in a very real sense, when you celebrate someone else's virtue, when you feel genuine happiness at another person's generosity or kindness, you are planting wholesome seeds in your own heart. This is one of the most accessible and joyful practices the Buddha ever taught. You do not need to do anything difficult or extraordinary. You simply need to notice goodness in others and feel happy about it. When you see someone being generous, let your heart feel glad. When you hear about someone's kind act, let yourself feel a warm glow of appreciation. When a friend achieves something through honest effort, let your happiness for them be genuine and wholehearted. Each of these moments of sympathetic joy, called mudita in the ancient language, is a seed of tremendous power. You are literally cultivating happiness by being happy about others' happiness. And the opposite is also true, which is worth noting with gentle honesty. When you see someone else's good fortune and feel jealousy instead of joy, when you hear about someone's success and feel a sting of resentment, when you cannot bring yourself to celebrate another person's happiness because it reminds you of what you lack, those moments are also karmic seeds. They are seeds of bitterness, of contraction, of a heart that is closing rather than opening. The Buddha was not judgmental about this. He understood that jealousy is a natural human tendency, deeply rooted in the habit of comparing and measuring. But he also knew that this habit, left unchecked, leads to tremendous inner suffering. The antidote is not to force yourself to feel something you do not feel. It is to gently, patiently practice shifting the habit. The next time you notice jealousy arising, you do not need to fight it or condemn yourself for feeling it. Just notice it. Recognize it as an old channel, a familiar pattern. And then, softly, deliberately, try to find even a small spark of genuine happiness for the other person. It might be tiny at first, barely a flicker. But that flicker is a seed. And with repeated practice, that seed grows stronger, and the old channel of jealousy gradually becomes shallower while the new channel of joy gradually becomes deeper. This is the patient work of karmic transformation, and it happens not through dramatic gestures but through the quiet, daily cultivation of the heart. It is the work of a lifetime, and it is available to everyone, regardless of background, education, status, or belief. You do not need to be a scholar of ancient texts or a practitioner of advanced meditation. You simply need to be willing to pay attention to the seeds you are planting and to gently, patiently choose seeds that lead toward openness, warmth, and genuine care for yourself and for others. And this care for others is not separate from care for yourself. One of the most beautiful aspects of the Buddha's teaching on karma is how it dissolves the apparent boundary between selfishness and selflessness. When you are kind to another person, you benefit yourself. When you are generous to another, you enrich your own heart. When you forgive someone who has hurt you, you free your own mind from the prison of resentment. Karma reveals that helping others and helping yourself are not two different activities. They are one and the same. This is why the Buddha said that the person who truly loves themselves would never harm another being. Because to harm another is to plant a seed of suffering in your own heart. To cheat another is to impoverish your own character. To deceive another is to cloud your own clarity. True self-love, in the deepest sense, naturally expresses itself as love for all beings, because the wise heart understands that there is no real separation between your well-being and the well-being of those around you. This understanding carries a warmth that can transform even the most ordinary moments into something meaningful. The next time you hold the door open for a stranger, you are not just being polite. You are planting a seed of kindness in the most fertile garden in existence, the garden of your own heart. The next time you bite your tongue instead of saying something cruel, you are not just avoiding conflict. You are choosing which channels your mind will flow through in the future. The next time you offer a sincere word of encouragement to someone who is struggling, you are not just being nice. You are participating in the great, invisible, infinitely patient process by which karma shapes the world. And within this process, there is a particular kind of karmic action that carries a weight and significance that the Buddha spoke about with special emphasis, something that touches on the very roots of how we see ourselves and our place in the world. That action is the cultivation of right view. Of all the seeds a person can plant, the Buddha identified right view as the most consequential, the most far-reaching, the most transformative. Right view is not about adopting a particular belief system or subscribing to a set of doctrines. It is about seeing reality clearly, understanding the nature of actions and their consequences, recognizing that what you do matters, and perceiving the interconnected web of cause and effect that underlies all of existence. The Buddha placed right view at the very beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path, not by accident but by design. It is the foundation upon which everything else rests. Without right view, even the most disciplined practice can go astray. Without understanding the basic principles of karma, a person might practice generosity in hopes of gaining fame, or practice moral conduct out of fear rather than wisdom, or practice meditation in pursuit of supernatural powers rather than genuine liberation. The intention behind the practice is what determines its karmic quality, and right view is what aligns intention with reality. There is a teaching in the Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha describes the consequences of wrong view in stark terms. He says that of all unwholesome seeds, wrong view is the most dangerous, because it corrupts everything that follows from it. If a person sincerely believes that actions have no consequences, that there is no difference between wholesome and unwholesome behavior, that kindness and cruelty are equally meaningless, then every choice they make will be poisoned by that misunderstanding. They will have no internal compass guiding them toward goodness, no motivation to cultivate care, no reason to avoid harm. Wrong view is like planting a garden with poisoned soil. No matter how carefully you tend the surface, everything that grows from that soil will be tainted. Conversely, right view is like planting in rich, healthy earth. When you understand that actions have consequences, that kindness bears sweet fruit while cruelty bears bitter fruit, that every intention matters, that understanding naturally aligns your choices with wisdom. You do not need a list of rules posted on the wall. You do not need someone standing over your shoulder reminding you to be good. The understanding itself guides you, naturally and organically, like water flowing downhill. Right view is the deepest and most fundamental karmic seed because it shapes the quality of every other seed you plant. And here is something that might surprise you. The Buddha taught that even a single moment of right view, even a brief flash of genuine understanding about the nature of karma and its consequences, carries immense karmic weight. In the Anguttara Nikaya, he compared the merit of establishing someone in right view to the merit of feeding and clothing every being in the world. That may sound like an exaggeration, but think about what it means. When someone truly understands that their actions have consequences, their entire orientation toward life changes. Every choice they make from that point forward is influenced by that understanding. The ripple effects are incalculable. This is why the Buddha spent so much of his teaching career talking about karma. It was not because he wanted people to be afraid of making mistakes. It was because he knew that once someone truly grasps the principle of cause and effect as it operates in the moral and psychological realm, something shifts deep inside them. They begin to live with more awareness, more care, more intentionality. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. And that shift in orientation is perhaps the single most valuable karmic seed a human being can plant. Now, there is a dimension of karma that the ancient texts discuss with particular care, and it relates to a moment that every living being will face, the moment of death. The Buddha taught that the quality of the mind at the time of death has a significant influence on the nature of the next rebirth. This does not mean that a lifetime of wholesome actions can be erased by a single bad thought at the moment of dying, nor does it mean that a lifetime of harmful actions can be redeemed by a single good thought at the end. The overall weight of a lifetime's karmic accumulation is by far the most significant factor. But the mind state at the moment of death acts as a kind of final nudge, a last seed that joins the momentum of everything that came before. Think of it like a tree that has been growing for decades, leaning slightly in one direction due to the prevailing winds. When the tree finally falls, it falls in the direction it was leaning. The moment of death does not change the direction the tree has been growing all along. But if there is a sudden gust of wind at the very moment the tree begins to fall, that gust can influence exactly where the tree lands. The Buddha described several categories of karma that operate at the time of death. The most powerful is what he called weighty karma, actions of such tremendous force that they override everything else. On the wholesome side, the deepest states of meditation and the attainment of any stage of awakening carry this kind of weight. On the unwholesome side, the most severe actions, such as deliberately harming one's own parents or deliberately causing a schism in the spiritual community, carry equally heavy weight. These actions are so potent that they determine the next rebirth regardless of anything else. Below weighty karma, there is habitual karma, the accumulated force of whatever a person has done most consistently throughout their life. This is the karmic momentum, the direction the tree has been leaning. For most people, this is the most influential factor at the time of death. If you have spent your life cultivating kindness, that habitual momentum carries you forward. If you have spent your life cultivating hostility, that momentum carries you in a very different direction. Then there is death proximate karma, the actions or mental states that arise close to the moment of death itself. This is the gust of wind. If a person who has lived a generally good life is overwhelmed by fear or anger in their final moments, that mental state can influence the immediate circumstances of the next rebirth, though it cannot override the deeper momentum of a lifetime's cultivation. Conversely, if a person who has lived carelessly experiences a moment of genuine peace or faith in their final breath, that too can have a softening influence. There is a story about Queen Malika that illustrates the complexity of karma at the time of death in a way that is both instructive and deeply human. Malika was the chief queen of King Pasenadi, one of the great kings of the Buddhist time. She was widely known as a devoted and generous supporter of the Buddha and his community. She practiced the teachings with sincerity, she was known for her wisdom, and she was one of the most respected lay disciples of her era. But Queen Malika carried a secret. At some point during her life, she had committed a single act that she deeply regretted, and she had compounded that act by lying about it. The specific details vary in different commentarial traditions, but the core of the story is that she did something she was deeply ashamed of and then told a lie to cover it up. That single lie, told to her husband the king, planted a karmic seed that weighed on her heart. When Queen Malika died, despite a lifetime of extraordinary generosity and sincere practice, that unresolved karmic seed of deception was what arose in her mind near the moment of death. According to the commentary, she was briefly reborn in a realm of suffering before the enormous accumulated merit of her lifelong practice quickly took effect and she was reborn in a heavenly realm. The suffering was brief, a mere flicker compared to the vast light of her wholesome karma, but it happened. The lie had planted a seed, and that seed ripened. King Pasenadi, who loved Malika deeply, was distressed when the Buddha confirmed that she had experienced even a moment of suffering after death. But the Buddha also reassured him that her wholesome karma was so vast and so powerful that the brief suffering was already past, and she was now in a state of great happiness. This story is not told to frighten anyone about the consequences of a single mistake. It is told to illustrate, with honesty and compassion, how subtle and precise the workings of karma can be. A lifetime of goodness creates powerful positive momentum. But unresolved seeds, particularly those rooted in deception and left unexamined, still carry their own weight. The teaching here is not about perfection. It is about honesty, about the importance of acknowledging our mistakes, making peace with them, and not allowing them to fester in the hidden corners of the heart. And this connects to something the Buddha emphasized repeatedly, the extraordinary power of truthfulness. Among all the forms of wholesome speech, the Buddha singled out truthfulness as the most foundational. He said that a person who would tell a deliberate lie is capable of any other unwholesome action, because once the commitment to truth is broken, the internal compass that guides moral behavior loses its reliability. Truthfulness is not just about avoiding deception. It is about aligning the inner world with the outer world, about living without the constant tension of maintaining appearances that do not match reality. When you live truthfully, there is an ease in your heart, a lightness that comes from not having to remember which version of events you told to which person. When you live with deception, there is a constant subtle anxiety, a background hum of fear that the truth will be discovered. That anxiety itself is a karmic result, a fruit of the seed of dishonesty that ripens as inner unease. The Buddha was not being moralistic when he taught about truthfulness. He was being practical. He was pointing out that deception creates suffering for the deceiver, regardless of whether anyone else ever finds out. Now, speaking of honesty, let us be honest about something that many people feel but few express openly. The teaching of karma can sometimes feel burdensome. When you first encounter this teaching deeply, there can be a period where it feels like every single moment is a test, like you are walking through a minefield of potential karmic consequences, afraid to say the wrong thing, think the wrong thought, or make the wrong choice. This is a natural reaction, but it is not the intended one. The Buddha did not teach karma to make life feel heavier. He taught it to make life feel lighter. When you understand that your actions have consequences, you gain something precious, agency. You are not at the mercy of random fate, arbitrary gods, or meaningless chance. You are a participant in the creation of your own experience. And that participation is not a burden. It is a gift. It means that change is always possible, that improvement is always available, that the direction of your life is in your own hands. The weight comes when you try to control everything, when you try to micromanage every thought and every action with anxious precision. But that is not what the Buddha recommended. He recommended awareness, not control. There is a world of difference between the two. Awareness is gentle, open, receptive. It notices what is happening without panic. Control is rigid, tense, fearful. It tries to force a particular outcome. The practice the Buddha taught is one of gentle awareness, noticing the seeds you are planting, choosing with care when you can, and accepting with grace when old seeds ripen in ways you did not choose. There is a beautiful quality in the Buddhist teachings called equanimity, which is sometimes translated as even-mindedness or balanced awareness. Equanimity is the quality of meeting whatever arises, whether pleasant or unpleasant, whether welcome or unwelcome, with a steady, open heart. It is not indifference. Indifference does not care. Equanimity cares deeply but does not cling. Equanimity understands that some of what happens in life is the ripening of old karma that cannot be changed, and it meets those moments with grace. At the same time, equanimity does not become passive or resigned. It remains fully engaged with the present moment, fully committed to planting wholesome seeds, but without the anxious grasping that turns a beautiful practice into an exhausting performance. There is a story about the Buddha's half-brother, a prince named Nanda, that illustrates how even imperfect motivations can serve as stepping stones toward genuine transformation. Nanda was a handsome young prince who was deeply attached to his beautiful wife, Janapada Kalyani. He was, by all accounts, consumed by sensual pleasure and had no interest in spiritual practice. When the Buddha visited their family home, Nanda reluctantly followed his elder brother out of social obligation and somehow found himself ordained as a monk, though his heart was still back at the palace with his beloved wife. Nanda was miserable as a monk. He could not concentrate. He could not meditate. All he could think about was Janapada Kalyani and the life of comfort he had left behind. Sensing Nanda's struggle, the Buddha did something surprising. He took Nanda on a journey and showed him a vision of celestial nymphs of extraordinary beauty. "Are these nymphs more beautiful than Janapada Kalyani?" the Buddha asked. Nanda, overwhelmed by the vision, admitted that compared to these celestial beings, his wife was like a burnt monkey. The Buddha then said, "Practice well, and these celestial nymphs will be yours." Now, this is a teaching method that might seem strange at first glance. The Buddha was essentially motivating Nanda with a reward, dangling a carrot of celestial beauty in front of a man driven by desire. This seems to contradict everything we have discussed about the importance of pure intention. But the Buddha was a supremely skilled teacher who understood that people start where they are, not where they ideally should be. Nanda's motivation was imperfect, but it got him practicing. And as he practiced, something unexpected happened. As Nanda deepened his meditation and his understanding of the teachings, his mind began to change. The desire for celestial nymphs that had originally motivated him started to fade. He began to see through the nature of desire itself, to understand that no amount of beauty, whether human or celestial, could provide lasting satisfaction. His motivation evolved. What began as craving gradually transformed into genuine wisdom. Nanda eventually attained full awakening, not because of the celestial nymphs but because the practice itself transformed his understanding from the inside out. This story is remarkable because it shows that karma is not just about starting with perfect intentions. It is about starting wherever you are and allowing the practice of wholesome action to gradually transform the quality of your intentions over time. The seed Nanda planted when he first began practicing was tainted by desire, yes. But the act of practicing, the discipline, the effort, the engagement with wholesome habits, all of these planted additional seeds that gradually overwhelmed the original impure motivation. By the time Nanda reached awakening, the original seed of desire had been buried beneath an abundance of seeds of wisdom, clarity, and genuine freedom. This carries a message of extraordinary encouragement for anyone who feels that their motivations are not pure enough, that they are practicing kindness for the wrong reasons, or that they are doing good deeds with mixed intentions. The Buddha understood that human motivations are almost always mixed. Rarely does anyone act from a single, perfectly pure intention. And that is perfectly fine. What matters is the direction of movement. If you are moving toward greater awareness, greater kindness, greater wisdom, even if your starting point is imperfect and your motivations are messy, you are planting seeds that will gradually transform both you and your world. And this gradual transformation is one of the most hopeful aspects of the entire teaching on karma. Change does not need to be sudden, dramatic, or complete to be real. The small, steady, quiet cultivation of wholesome qualities is just as powerful as any dramatic conversion experience, perhaps even more so, because it is sustainable. A sudden flash of insight can illuminate the landscape, but it is the steady work of daily practice that actually clears the path and builds the road. Think about how water shapes stone. A single drop of water on a rock accomplishes nothing visible. But drop after drop after drop, year after year, century after century, water carves canyons. It shapes mountains. It transforms landscapes. The patience of water is its power. And the patience of consistent wholesome action works in exactly the same way. You may not see the results today or tomorrow or even this year. But the carving is happening. The shaping is underway. The canyon of kindness is being hollowed out, slowly and surely, by the steady dripping of your daily choices. The Buddha spoke about a related concept that adds another layer to our understanding, the idea of karmic fruition being influenced by the quality and consistency of the soil in which the seed is planted. Not all wholesome actions produce the same results, even if they appear identical on the surface. The same act of generosity, giving a meal to a hungry person, can produce vastly different karmic fruits depending on several factors. The purity of the intention behind the gift, the spiritual quality of the recipient, the effort involved in acquiring what is given, and the state of mind at the time of giving all influence the potency of the karmic seed. This is why the ancient texts sometimes describe certain acts of generosity as being of incalculable merit. It is not because the external gift was enormous but because the internal conditions were extraordinarily refined. A gift given with complete selflessness, with no expectation of return, with a heart overflowing with genuine love, to a recipient of great virtue, at a time of great need, plants a seed of staggering power. And yet a gift given reluctantly, with resentment, or with strings attached, to someone chosen only for the social prestige it might bring, plants a much weaker seed, even if the material value of the gift is far greater. This principle operates across all forms of karmic action, not just generosity. The potency of any karmic seed depends not on its outward appearance but on the inner conditions that accompany it. A prayer offered with genuine devotion and concentration plants a deeper seed than a prayer mumbled distractedly out of habit. A moment of forgiveness extended from the depths of the heart plants a deeper seed than a grudging, "I forgive you," offered only to keep the peace. A word of truth spoken at great personal cost plants a deeper seed than a truth spoken when it is easy and convenient. And this is where the teaching of karma becomes not just a philosophical framework but a living art, the art of cultivating the inner life with the same care and attention that a master gardener brings to a beloved garden. It is the art of examining not just what you do but how you do it, not just what you say but the quality of heart from which your words arise, not just what you think but the depth and clarity of your awareness as you think it. This is not obsessive self-monitoring. It is gentle, loving attention to the most important garden you will ever tend, the garden within your own heart, the garden from which every experience of joy and sorrow, peace and turmoil, freedom and bondage ultimately grows. And within this garden, there is a particular kind of seed that the Buddha identified as being among the most healing and transformative actions a human heart can perform, a seed that has the power to dissolve ancient patterns of suffering and open doorways that seemed permanently sealed. That seed is forgiveness. Not the polite, surface-level kind of forgiveness where you say the words but still carry the wound like a stone in your pocket. Not the performative kind where you announce your forgiveness publicly while privately rehearsing the offense every night before you fall asleep. The kind of forgiveness the Buddha pointed toward is something far deeper, far more radical, and far more liberating than any of those familiar versions. It is the willingness to release the grip of resentment entirely, to open the hand that has been clenched around an old hurt and let it go, not for the sake of the person who harmed you, but for the sake of your own freedom. Resentment, the Buddha understood, is one of the most insidious karmic seeds a person can carry. It is a seed that does not just sit quietly in the soil waiting to ripen. It actively poisons every other seed around it. When you hold on to resentment, it colors your perceptions. It distorts how you see the world. It makes you suspicious of kindness, doubtful of sincerity, and resistant to joy. It creates a kind of inner drought where even the most fertile soil becomes barren. And the cruel irony of resentment is that the person you resent often has no idea you are suffering. They may have moved on entirely, living their life without a backward glance, while you remain trapped in a moment that has long since passed. The Buddha compared holding on to anger and resentment to picking up a hot coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. The person holding the coal is the one who gets burned. This image is so vivid because it captures the self-inflicted nature of resentment with absolute clarity. The harm you are trying to direct outward is actually consuming you from within. And every moment you continue to hold that coal, the burn deepens. Forgiveness, then, is not a gift you give to the person who wronged you. It is a gift you give to yourself. It is the act of putting down the coal. And when you put it down, when you truly release the grip of resentment, something remarkable happens in the garden of the heart. Space opens up. Light gets in. The soil that had become toxic and barren begins to heal. New seeds can take root in places that have been closed off for years, sometimes for decades. There is a story from the ancient texts about a queen named Samavati who embodies this kind of radical forgiveness in a way that still resonates across the centuries. Samavati was one of the chief queens of King Udina. She was gentle, wise, devoted to the teachings of the Buddha, and deeply loved by her attendants. But she had an enemy within the palace walls, another queen named Magandiya, who harbored a fierce and relentless hatred toward Samavati. Magandiya's hatred had deep roots. Before becoming queen, Magandiya had been offered in marriage to the Buddha by her father, and the Buddha had declined. Magandiya took this as a devastating personal rejection, and she transferred her rage onto anyone connected to the Buddha and his teachings. When she discovered that Samavati was a devoted follower of the Buddha, her hatred found a target. Magandiya tried to destroy Samavati in every way she could think of. She planted false evidence to make it appear that Samavati was plotting against the king. She spread lies and rumors. She manipulated situations to turn the king against his own queen. At one point, she even arranged for a poisonous snake to be hidden in Samavati's chambers. Through all of this, Samavati responded not with hatred or counterattack but with loving kindness. She practiced what the Buddha called metta, the sincere wish for another being's happiness and well-being, directed at Magandiya herself. Not as a strategy, not as a way to appear virtuous, but as a genuine practice of the heart. She understood that Magandiya's hatred was a fire consuming Magandiya from within, and she responded with the only thing that has any hope of extinguishing that kind of fire: genuine, unwavering goodwill. The story reaches its most devastating moment when Magandiya, unable to destroy Samavati through deception, resorted to the most extreme measure. She arranged for a fire to be set in the quarters where Samavati and her attendants lived. The fire consumed the building. Samavati and 500 of her attendants perished in the flames. When King Yudina learned what had happened and who was responsible, justice was carried out against Magandiya. But the teaching that the Buddha drew from this tragedy was not about justice or retribution. He spoke about Samavati's extraordinary quality of heart, about how she had maintained loving kindness even in the face of relentless persecution. He declared Samavati to be the foremost among his lay female disciples in the practice of loving kindness. And he explained that while Samavati could not prevent the ripening of her past karma, which included the circumstances of her death, the seeds she planted through her unwavering practice of metta were of incalculable power and beauty, seeds that carried her forward into realms of great peace and light. This story does not offer an easy moral. It does not say that if you practice loving kindness, nothing bad will happen to you. Life is more complex than that, and the Buddha never promised that spiritual practice would serve as armor against all suffering. What the story does say is that you always have a choice about what you plant in your heart, regardless of what is happening around you. Even in the most extreme circumstances, even in the face of hatred and destruction, the heart retains its freedom to choose love over hatred, compassion over bitterness, forgiveness over revenge. And that choice is the most powerful karmic act available to a human being. There is a companion story about a lay disciple named Uttara that adds another dimension to this teaching. Uttara was a young woman who practiced the Buddha's teachings with great sincerity. She had arranged to observe a special period of heightened moral practice, and during this time, her husband, at the instigation of a rival woman named Sirima, invited Sirima to the house. Sirima, jealous and spiteful, heated a ladle of oil and poured the boiling liquid onto Uttara's head. But Uttara had been practicing loving-kindness meditation with deep concentration. According to the ancient account, because her mind was so thoroughly saturated with metta, the boiling oil did not harm her. It rolled off her body like water off a lotus leaf. The attendants who rushed to protect Uttara were so enraged at Sirima that they were about to attack her, but Uttara stopped them. "She is my friend," Uttara said. "Do not harm her." Sirima, witnessing this response, was so overwhelmed by the power of Uttara's compassion that she fell at Uttara's feet, begging for forgiveness. The two women were later reconciled, and Sirima herself became a follower of the Buddha's teachings. Whether we take the miraculous element of this story literally or as a vivid metaphor for the protective power of a mind steeped in goodwill, the underlying teaching is the same: loving kindness is not passive. It is not weakness. It is one of the most potent forces in the universe. It is a karmic seed of such extraordinary power that it can transform not only the one who practices it but the very circumstances around them. When the heart is truly filled with genuine goodwill, it creates a field of influence that touches everyone who comes near it. And this raises an interesting question about karma that goes beyond the individual. Can the karmic seeds of one person influence the broader world? Can the practice of goodness by a single individual ripple outward and affect the lives of many? The Buddha's answer to this question was a clear and emphatic yes. He taught that when a person cultivates the heart qualities known as the four immeasurables, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, the influence of that cultivation radiates outward in all directions, like the light of a lamp that illuminates not just the table it sits on but the entire room. A single person practicing deep loving kindness sends ripples of peace through their family, their community, their world. These ripples may be invisible, untraceable, impossible to quantify, but they are real. They are karmic seeds planted not just in one heart but scattered by the winds of intention into countless other hearts. This understanding transforms the practice of cultivating goodness from something private and personal into something that has genuine social and even cosmic significance. When you sit quietly and generate sincere wishes for the well-being of all beings, you are not engaged in a pleasant but ultimately inconsequential exercise. You are planting seeds in the vast field of shared existence. You are contributing to the karmic soil in which future generations will plant their own seeds. You are participating in a process that is both deeply intimate and infinitely vast. There is a concept in Buddhist thought that is sometimes called collective karma, though it is described more precisely as the shared karmic conditions that affect groups of beings. When a community consistently cultivates wholesome qualities, generosity, honesty, compassion, mutual support, the conditions of life in that community tend to improve. Not through magic but through the natural ripening of wholesome seeds. Trust grows. Cooperation deepens. Conflicts are resolved more skillfully. Resources are shared more equitably. The community itself becomes a garden in which individual seeds have a better chance of flourishing. Conversely, when a community consistently cultivates unwholesome qualities, greed, dishonesty, exploitation, indifference to suffering, the conditions deteriorate. Trust erodes. Cooperation breaks down. Conflicts escalate. Resources are hoarded by the few. The community becomes a garden choked with weeds, where even the most wholesome individual seeds struggle to find light. This is not a fatalistic teaching. It does not say that you are trapped by the collective karma of the society you were born into. But it does acknowledge that individual karma and collective conditions are deeply intertwined. The seeds you plant as an individual contribute to the collective soil, and the collective soil influences the conditions in which your individual seeds ripen. This is why the Buddha placed such emphasis on community, on what he called the Sangha. A community of people committed to cultivating wholesome qualities creates an environment that supports and amplifies the individual practice of each member. The whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And this communal dimension of karma carries important implications for how we think about responsibility. When you see suffering in the world, the teaching of karma does not allow you to simply shrug and say, "That is their karma, not my problem." Because your karma and theirs are interwoven. The conditions that produce suffering in one corner of the world are influenced by the choices and actions of people everywhere, including you. This is not about guilt. It is about interconnection. It is about recognizing that the seeds you plant in your own heart ripple outward in ways that contribute to the collective garden, for better or for worse. There was a wealthy merchant named Anathapindika who understood this communal dimension of karma with extraordinary depth. Anathapindika, whose name means feeder of the helpless, was one of the most generous supporters of the Buddha and his community. He purchased an entire grove, the famous Jita Grove, and donated it as a monastery where the Buddha could teach and monks could practice. But Anathapindika's generosity did not stop at grand donations. He fed the hungry. He clothed the poor. He cared for the sick. He supported those who had no one else to turn to. His generosity was not occasional or performative. It was the defining quality of his daily life. Over the years, Anathapindika's wealth gradually diminished because of the sheer scale of his giving. He became, by worldly standards, a much poorer man than he had been. Some might look at this and say, "See, generosity made him poor. What kind of karma is that?" But the Buddha saw it very differently. He praised Anathapindika as one of the most exemplary lay disciples in history, not for his wealth but for his heart. The seeds Anathapindika planted through his decades of selfless giving were of incalculable power. The fruits of those seeds would ripen across lifetimes in ways that far exceeded anything material wealth could provide. When Anathapindika was on his deathbed, the great disciple Sariputta visited him and offered a profound teaching that moved the old merchant to tears. Anathapindika said he had never heard such a deep and beautiful teaching before. Sariputta gently noted that such teachings were usually reserved for ordained monks. And Anathapindika, even in his final moments, thought not of himself but of others, asking that these teachings be made available to lay people as well, so that those with little dust in their eyes might benefit. Even in dying, he was planting seeds of generosity, thinking of what others might need rather than what he himself was losing. Anathapindika's life illustrates something essential about the karmic relationship between generosity and true wealth. The Buddha taught that generosity is itself a form of wealth, the deepest form, because it is a wealth that cannot be stolen, cannot be destroyed by fire or flood, cannot be lost through market fluctuations or political upheaval. Material wealth is inherently unstable. It comes and goes according to countless conditions beyond your control. But the wealth of a generous heart is permanent in a way that no bank account can be. Every act of giving strengthens the heart's capacity for openness and joy. Every moment of selfless care enriches the inner life in ways that compound over time, like interest accumulating in an account that never closes. And this is perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the Buddha's teaching on karma and generosity. True giving is not loss. It feels like loss from the perspective of the ego, which measures everything in terms of mine and not mine, which tracks every coin given away as a subtraction from the total. But from the perspective of karma, giving is the most reliable form of investment there is. What you give away freely and with genuine goodwill is never gone. It is transformed. It becomes a seed of abundance that will bear fruit in its own time, in its own way, in forms that may be utterly different from what you gave but always reflective of the quality of the intention behind the giving. This does not mean you should give away everything you have and leave yourself destitute. The Buddha was practical and balanced in his advice. He recommended that lay people divide their resources wisely, providing for their family, setting aside savings for times of need, investing in their livelihood, and offering a portion for charitable and spiritual purposes. The middle way applies to generosity just as it applies to everything else. The point is not to give until it hurts but to give until it heals, to find the place where giving opens the heart without creating unnecessary hardship. And there is a quality of heart that the Buddha connected intimately to the understanding of karma, a quality that acts as a bridge between wisdom and compassion, between seeing clearly and acting kindly. That quality is gratitude. When you truly understand karma, you begin to see that every good thing in your life, every moment of joy, every act of kindness you have received, every bit of beauty that has graced your days, is the fruit of seeds planted by someone, somewhere, at some time. Nothing good comes from nowhere. Everything you enjoy is the ripened fruit of wholesome causes and conditions, many of which were set in motion by the efforts and sacrifices of others. Your parents cared for you when you were helpless. Teachers shared their knowledge with patience. Friends offered comfort when you were in pain. Strangers grew the food you eat, built the roads you walk, created the music that moves your heart. The entire fabric of your daily life is woven from the karmic generosity of countless beings, most of whom you will never meet, many of whom lived and died long before you were born. When you pause to see this, genuinely see it, a natural and spontaneous gratitude arises. And that gratitude is itself one of the most beautiful karmic seeds you can plant. Gratitude softens the heart. It dissolves entitlement. It opens the eyes to beauty that was always there but hidden behind the veil of taking things for granted. A grateful heart is a fertile heart, one in which seeds of generosity, kindness, and compassion take root easily and grow strong. An ungrateful heart, by contrast, is like compacted, dry earth, resistant to new growth, unable to receive what is offered. The Buddha encouraged the practice of reflection on the good that others have done, not as a moral obligation but as a natural expression of clear seeing. When you see clearly how much you have received, the impulse to give back arises on its own. You do not need to be told to be generous. Generosity flows naturally from a heart that is aware of how much it has been given. And so the teaching of karma, when it is truly understood and truly absorbed into the fabric of daily life, does not make a person rigid or anxious or self-righteous. It makes a person grateful, gentle, aware, and quietly joyful. It reveals the extraordinary significance of ordinary moments. It transforms the mundane into the sacred, not through any special ritual or belief but through the simple recognition that every thought, every word, every action is a seed, and every seed matters. There is a tenderness in this understanding that is easy to miss if you approach karma only intellectually. The tenderness lies in the recognition that everyone, every single being you will ever encounter, is engaged in the same process of planting and harvesting, of sowing and reaping. Everyone is carrying seeds they planted long ago, some sweet and some bitter. Everyone is dealing with the consequences of choices made in moments of clarity and moments of confusion. Everyone is doing their best with the understanding they have, even when that best falls painfully short. When you see others through this lens, judgment softens into understanding. Condemnation gives way to compassion. The urge to punish transforms into a wish to help. Because you recognize in every other person the same vulnerability, the same capacity for both wisdom and folly, that you find in yourself. We are all gardeners, tending our patches of earth with whatever tools and knowledge we have, sometimes planting with great care and sometimes scattering seeds recklessly, sometimes nurturing with patience and sometimes neglecting with distraction. And knowing this, knowing that every being is navigating this intricate web of cause and effect, planting seeds and bearing fruits, learning and forgetting and learning again, there arises a quiet, steady compassion that does not depend on whether a person deserves it. Compassion, in the Buddhist sense, is not something that needs to be earned. It is the natural response of a heart that sees clearly. And seeing clearly means seeing that everyone is subject to karma, everyone is shaped by their choices and conditions, everyone is both the author and the reader of their own unfolding story. This compassion extends in all directions, not just toward those who are suffering visibly, but toward those whose suffering is hidden behind wealth and power and social masks. It extends toward the difficult person in your life, the one whose behavior baffles and frustrates you, because you recognize that their behavior is the fruit of seeds planted in confusion and pain. It extends toward yourself, toward your own mistakes, your own blind spots, your own moments of weakness, because you recognize that you too are a gardener learning as you go, doing the best you can with what you know. And from this place of compassion, something extraordinary begins to emerge, something that the Buddha described as the highest fruition of understanding karma and living in harmony with its truth. It is not a reward given from the outside. It is a blossoming that happens from within, a gradual, quiet, irreversible opening of the heart toward a freedom that no external circumstance can touch. This blossoming has been described in many ways across the centuries, in many languages and many traditions, but its essence is always the same, the discovery that when you stop fighting against the nature of things and start working with it, when you stop resisting the truth of cause and effect and start planting with wisdom and care, life becomes not lighter in the sense of easier but lighter in the sense of more luminous, more transparent, more alive with meaning and purpose than you ever imagined possible. Not because the difficulties disappear. They do not. The rain still falls. The wind still blows. Old seeds still ripen in ways that bring discomfort and challenge and heartache. But the way you meet those moments changes. The quality of your presence in the midst of difficulty transforms. Where there was once reactivity, there is now a breath of space. Where there was once confusion, there is now a quiet knowing that this too is part of the process, that this too is a seed ripening, and that even in the midst of its ripening, you have the freedom to choose what you plant next. There is a teaching that monks and lay people in the Buddhist tradition are encouraged to reflect on every single day. It is a set of 5 contemplations, and one of them speaks directly to the heart of karma. The reflection goes, I am the owner of my actions. I am the heir of my actions. I am born of my actions. I am related to my actions. Whatever I do, for good or for ill, to that I will fall heir. These words, known in the ancient language as the Kammasakata, reflection, are not meant to be recited like a mechanical formula. They are meant to be absorbed slowly, like rainwater soaking into deep soil, until they become part of how you see yourself and your life. I am the owner of my actions. Not the owner of outcomes, not the owner of other people's choices, not the owner of the weather or the economy or the 1,000 unpredictable forces that swirl through existence. But the owner of your actions. Your intentions. Your responses. Your choices. This is both the limit and the limitless gift of being alive. You cannot control everything that happens to you. But you can always choose how you respond. And that response is yours. It belongs to you in the most intimate and inalienable sense. No one can take it from you. No circumstance can strip you of the freedom to choose your next seed. I am the heir of my actions. What you have done, you will inherit. Not in some distant, abstract future, but in the living texture of your daily experience. The patience you have cultivated shows up as steadiness when life gets turbulent. The anger you have fed shows up as tension in your body and sharpness in your voice. The generosity you have practiced shows up as an openness of heart that draws good people toward you. The dishonesty you have indulged shows up as a subtle unease, a difficulty trusting others because deep down you know how easily trust can be betrayed. You are always living in the garden you have been planting. Always. Whatever I do, for good or for ill, to that I will fall heir. This is the most radical statement of personal empowerment in all of spiritual literature. It does not hand your fate to the stars, to a deity, to luck, or to some external force beyond your reach. It places the creative power of your life squarely in your own hands. And it does so not with the cold detachment of a philosophical proposition but with the warm intimacy of a truth whispered by a trusted friend who wants nothing more than for you to wake up to your own extraordinary capacity. There was a woman named Patakara whose story speaks to this capacity in a way that is almost unbearable in its rawness. Patakara was a woman who lost everything. Not gradually, not one piece at a time, but in a cascade of tragedy so swift and so total that it shattered her mind. She lost her husband to a sudden death. She lost both of her children, one taken by a hawk and one swept away by a river. And when she stumbled, half mad with grief, back to her family home, she learned that her parents and brother had just died in a house fire. The totality of her loss was complete. Every person she loved in the world was gone. Patakara wandered the streets in a state of madness, her clothes torn, her hair wild, her mind broken. People avoided her. They called her the crazy woman. She was an object of pity and disgust, a ghost walking through a world that had taken everything from her. And then she stumbled into the presence of the Buddha. He spoke to her gently, calmly, clearly. "Sister, recover your mindfulness." Those simple words, spoken with such quiet authority and such genuine compassion, cut through the fog of her madness like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Patakara paused. She heard. Something in her, some deep, unbroken core that even total loss could not destroy, responded to the truth in his voice. The Buddha did not try to explain away her suffering. He did not tell her that her losses were karmic punishments or cosmic lessons. He did not minimize her pain or rush her toward acceptance. He simply offered her a teaching about impermanence, about the nature of life and death, about the reality that all beings who are born will die, and that clinging to what is inherently impermanent is the root of the deepest suffering. Patakara listened. And in her listening, something transformed. She did not stop grieving. But she stopped drowning. She found ground beneath her feet. She ordained as a nun and threw herself into practice with the fierce energy of someone who has nothing left to lose and therefore everything to gain. She became one of the most accomplished nuns in the Buddhist community, eventually attaining full liberation. The woman who had lost everything found something that could never be taken away, the freedom of a mind that had seen through the illusion of permanence and discovered the peace that lies on the other side of that seeing. Padikara's story is relevant to the teaching of karma in a specific and important way. Her losses were the ripening of karmic seeds, the convergence of conditions stretching back through time in ways no human mind could fully trace. She did not cause those losses through any action in her present life. She did not deserve them. The universe was not punishing her. It was simply that seeds planted long ago, in lives beyond remembering, found their season and ripened, all at once, with devastating force. But what Padikara did with her suffering, how she responded to the ripening of those bitter seeds, was entirely her choice. And she chose to turn toward truth rather than away from it. She chose to plant new seeds of wisdom and awareness in the scorched earth of her grief. She chose to transform the most barren landscape imaginable into a garden of liberation. And those new seeds, planted with such raw sincerity and such fierce resolve, bore fruit of extraordinary beauty. This is what the teaching of karma ultimately comes down to. Not a ledger of punishments and rewards. Not a system of cosmic accounting. Not a reason to be afraid of your past or anxious about your future. Karma is simply the recognition that life is responsive. That existence is not deaf to your choices. That what you do echoes, resonates, reverberates through the fabric of time and space in ways both seen and unseen. And that because of this responsiveness, you are never powerless. You are never without recourse. You are never stuck, no matter how stuck you may feel. Even in the darkest moments, when the weight of old karma feels crushing, when the consequences of past actions seem inescapable, when life has taken everything and left you standing in the ashes, you still hold seeds in your hand. You always hold seeds. The question is always the same: what will you plant? There was a monk named Baiya who came to the Buddha with an urgency born of the recognition that life is short and the opportunity to awaken is precious. Baiya had traveled a great distance to find the Buddha, and when he arrived, the Buddha was on his alms round. Baiya asked for a teaching. The Buddha said he was busy and kept walking. Baiya asked again. The Buddha again said it was not the time. Baiya asked a third time, with the earnest plea that life is uncertain, that he might die before getting another chance, and that he needed to hear the truth now. The Buddha stopped. And he gave one of the shortest, most concentrated teachings ever recorded. In the seen, let there be just the seen. In the heard, just the heard. In the sensed, just the sensed. In the known, just the known. When for you there is just the seen in the seen, just the heard in the heard, just the sensed in the sensed, just the known in the known, then you will not be in that. When you are not in that, you will not be there. When you are not there, you will be neither here nor there nor in between. This itself is the end of suffering. Baiya heard these words and, in that very moment, his mind was completely liberated. He attained full awakening right there on the road, standing before the Buddha, in the time it takes to hear a few sentences. Now, how does this connect to karma? It connects in the most fundamental way possible. Baiya's awakening was the fruit of lifetimes of karmic cultivation. It did not happen out of nowhere. The seeds had been planted over vast stretches of time, through countless lives of effort, practice, learning, and growth. The conditions had been slowly, patiently ripening, converging, preparing the soil of his mind for this one extraordinary moment. And when the moment arrived, when the final seed was planted by the Buddha's words falling on perfectly prepared ground, the entire karmic process flowered into liberation. This is the ultimate promise embedded within the teaching of karma. Not that life will be easy. Not that suffering will disappear. Not that everything will work out the way you want. But that every wholesome seed you plant is contributing to a process of awakening that is larger and more magnificent than anything you can presently see. You are building toward something. Every act of kindness, every moment of awareness, every choice made from wisdom rather than ignorance, every breath taken with mindfulness, is a step on a journey that may span lifetimes but is moving, steadily and irreversibly, in the direction of freedom. And you do not need to see the destination to trust the direction. You do not need to understand the full complexity of karma to benefit from its teaching. You do not need to know every detail of every seed you have ever planted to start planting better seeds right now. The practice is simple, even though the theory is vast. Be kind. Be honest. Be aware. Pay attention to the seeds you are planting. Nurture the ones that lead toward openness and joy. Stop feeding the ones that lead toward contraction and suffering. And trust that the process works, not because someone told you it does but because you can verify it in your own experience, moment by moment, day by day. Watch what happens when you spend a day in kindness. Notice how your heart feels at the end of that day. Watch what happens when you spend a day in irritation and complaint. Notice how your heart feels then. The evidence is not hidden in some ancient text or locked away in some monastery library. It is available right here, right now, in the laboratory of your own life. You are both the scientist and the experiment. And the results are always honest. The Buddha was once asked by a group of people called the Kalamas how they could know which spiritual teachers to trust and which teachings were true. His answer has become one of the most beloved passages in all of Buddhist literature. He told them not to accept anything simply because it was tradition, because it was written in a scripture, because a respected teacher said it, because it sounded logical, or because it aligned with their existing beliefs. Instead, he told them to test the teachings against their own experience. When you know for yourselves, he said, that certain things are wholesome, blameless, praised by the wise, and when adopted and carried out lead to benefit and happiness, then you should enter upon and abide in them. This advice applies perfectly to the teaching of karma. You do not need to take it on faith. You do not need to believe in rebirth or past lives or heavenly realms to begin working with karma in a meaningful way. You simply need to start paying attention. Start noticing the relationship between your intentions and your experiences. Start observing how the quality of your inner life shapes the quality of your outer life. Start experimenting with planting different seeds and watching what grows. The teaching will prove itself through your own lived experience, not through argument or authority. And as you pay attention, as you become a more careful and more conscious gardener of your own heart, something beautiful happens. The anxiety that often accompanies first hearing about karma begins to dissolve. The fear of past mistakes softens. The worry about future consequences eases. In their place arises a quiet confidence, not in any particular outcome but in the process itself. You begin to trust that the seeds of goodness you are planting are real. You begin to feel, in your bones, that kindness matters. That honesty matters. That awareness matters. That every small, quiet act of care contributes to something larger and more beautiful than you may ever see. And you begin to hold your own imperfections with more gentleness. Because you understand that you are not supposed to be perfect. You are supposed to be growing. You are supposed to be learning. You are supposed to be a gardener who sometimes plants the wrong thing, sometimes forgets to water, sometimes lets the weeds take over for a season. That is part of the process. The point is not to have a perfect garden. The point is to keep gardening. To keep showing up. To keep choosing, again and again and again, to plant what is beautiful and nourishing and true. The rain falls on every garden, the just and the unjust alike. The sun shines on every patch of earth, regardless of what has been planted there. And the gardener, in every season, has the same simple, profound, inexhaustible choice: what to plant next. This is the gift hidden within the teaching of karma. Not a burden. Not a sentence. Not a score to be settled. A gift. The gift of knowing that your life is not random. That your choices are not meaningless. That every single moment offers you the chance to participate in the creation of something good. The ancient texts describe a moment near the end of the Buddha's life when he lay between two sal trees, surrounded by his followers, preparing to leave this world. His final words were, "All conditioned things are of a nature to decay. Strive on with diligence." Even in his last breath, he was talking about karma. He was reminding everyone who could hear that nothing lasts forever, that every conditioned thing will change, and that the most important thing you can do with your precious human life is to strive with diligence, to put forth effort, to plant seeds of wisdom and compassion and care with whatever time and energy you have. He did not say, "Strive with perfection." He said, "Strive with diligence." Diligence is not about being flawless. It is about being persistent. It is about getting up one more time than you fall down. It is about planting one more good seed, even when the garden feels overrun. It is about continuing to choose kindness even when cruelty seems easier. It is about holding on to your commitment to truth even when deception seems more convenient. It is about trusting, with a trust that goes deeper than words, that the seeds you plant in goodness will grow. And they will grow, friends. They always do. Sometimes slowly, sometimes swiftly, sometimes in ways you expect and sometimes in ways that take your breath away with their unexpected beauty. The garden of karma is patient. It does not rush. It does not forget. It holds every seed you have ever planted and brings it to fruition when the time and conditions are right. Your job is not to control the harvest. Your job is simply to plant with care, to water with awareness, to tend with love, and to trust the ancient, reliable, infinitely patient process that has been turning seeds into flowers since the very beginning of time. So tonight, as the world grows quiet and the stars come out one by one, take a moment to feel the seeds resting in your hands. Feel the warmth of your own heartbeat. Feel the extraordinary privilege of being alive, of being conscious, of being a being who can choose. And know, with a quiet certainty that needs no proof beyond the evidence of your own living, breathing experience, that what you plant matters. That who you are becoming matters. That the garden you are tending, in the hidden, sacred, immeasurably beautiful landscape of your own heart, is the most important work you will ever do. And that it is enough. You are enough. Your next kind thought, your next honest word, your next gentle act of care, is enough. It is a seed. And it will grow.